Soon you will enter a world where the paranormal is very possible, where the supernatural is with us at every moment. Keep in mind that the following reports are not suitable for sensitive individuals, especially if you are suggestible or have already witnessed events that you cannot explain, because we cannot guarantee that the following stories will not attract something to you. Every day I started working at 9 a.m. in a factory in Mexico. I had been working as an accounting assistant for a while, and on a cold Monday in November, I wanted to leave early. So I decided to come in earlier, to be at the factory by 7 a.m. When I arrived, the security guard, a kind man around 60 years old, greeted me with a smile and said, "What's up? Did the rooster crow for everyone?" I confusedly asked him why he said that, and he replied that Gerardo, the head of human resources and my friend's husband, had been working since dawn. My confusion grew. This couldn't be. Gerardo couldn't be there because he had an accident on Friday night. When he turned too quickly, his car fell into a lake, and by the time the firefighters arrived to rescue him, it was already too late. He drowned. When I mentioned to the guard what had happened, he didn't believe me and even got angry, thinking I was joking about something serious. "You don't joke about that," he said. "Besides, you can see the light on in his office. The dead don't turn on lights, do they?" I insisted that it was true, that I wasn't lying, and he showed the security cameras, where it was clearly visible Gerardo entering through the door. Seeing my fear, the guard became interested and noted that Gerardo hadn't actually greeted him. However, since it was dark and foggy, he hadn't noticed anything unusual. We never saw Gerardo's face, just his silhouette walking towards the offices until it disappeared into the darkness. We were silent for a while. I was very scared and didn't want to go to the office alone. I felt relieved when the guard said, "Don't go alone, I'll accompany you." He quickly grabbed a flashlight and the keys, and we headed towards the offices. As we approached, we saw shadows through the blinds in Gerardo's office, as if someone was looking for something. When the guard pushed the door, it was locked. He always muttered some curse in surprise, and when he saw what was on the floor, I almost had a heart attack. There were wet shoe prints. The air in the factory seemed heavier, imbued with the silence of tension, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets. For the rest of the time, I remained paralyzed, staring at the screen that displayed those disturbing images. Gerardo's presence, which I knew shouldn't be there, seemed unquestionable. But that made the situation even more terrifying. The guard, now visibly upset, mumbled something incomprehensible, as if trying to convince himself that it was just a bad joke. Gathering my courage, he took his flashlight and suggested we go to Gerardo's office. As we walked down the silent hallways, every sound, the echoes of our footsteps, the buzzing of fluorescent lights, seemed amplified, as if the building conspired to make us hesitate. The guard, usually so self-assured, walked in absolute silence, with a tense face, his hands trembling as he held the flashlight. When we finally reached the office door, we saw a detail that momentarily stopped my heart. The lock was wet, with small droplets slowly dripping, creating discrete puddles on the floor. He tried to turn the lock, but it was locked. Strange, because neither of us remembered Gerardo usually locking the door. At that moment, the guard began to sweat, and I also felt the cold humidity rising from the surroundings. In a moment of impulse, he decided to open the door with his master key. When he pushed it, the air transformed, as if we were enveloped in a cold presence. Inside the office, the scene was even more disturbing. Perfectly formed wet shoe prints led to Gerardo's desk, where his papers were scattered, some soaked as if pulled from water. I approached closer, trying to understand, and noticed something familiar and terrifying among the documents. Gerardo's life insurance policy, directed to his wife. The ink, though slightly smeared with moisture, was still readable. It was as if that paper had been intentionally left there, the last message binding him between this world and the next. Then, an icy chill passed through my body, and I felt tingles that made every hair on my body stand up. The guard also noticed something strange and looked at me with wide eyes, as if he had noticed the same thing. At that moment, the light in the room began to flicker, and for a moment, we swore we saw the shadow of a figure behind us, peeking in the window's reflection. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, my voice cracking from sheer terror. He nodded wordlessly, his face pale, and his gaze fixed on the door as if something was threatening him from within. When we finally exited, the guard didn't look back. When we returned to the guardhouse, he broke the silence with a tense and almost whispered, "Daughter, I swear I saw Gerardo," as if he was there, trapped in that room, as if he wanted to finish something unfinished. From that day on, something changed in me and in the factory. Gerardo's office remained locked and empty, but it was impossible not to feel his invisible presence. Sometimes, colleagues reported hearing whispers in the hallways or distant sounds of papers shifting in his office. That figure, which I knew was no longer among us, continued to be present, leaving a trace that could not be erased. And then, on that cold Monday in November, I realized that there are stories that refuse to die and people who remain with us even after their last breath. As the initial shock faded, the sense of fear that flooded my mind only grew. The manager continued to speak, explaining that Gerardo's accident was something that shocked everyone in the factory. But he decided to wait a few days to make an official announcement. It seemed as if he was almost indifferent to the tension that hung between me and the guard, a quiet understanding that something extraordinary was wrong with that story. After the manager left, the guard looked at me with wide eyes, as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Finally, he quietly murmured, "What you saw in there, don't tell anyone." His words were laced with restrained but clear fear. I nodded, knowing that even if I tried to tell the truth, no one would believe me. The images of Gerardo walking the hallways, the wet prints on the floor, the soaked document, all of it seemed like a nightmare from which I had yet to awaken. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my routine in the factory, but something was different. It seemed as if the building was imbued with Gerardo's presence, as if a part of him still wandered the hallways, unable to rest in peace. Several colleagues began reporting strange incidents. Someone heard footsteps in the hallway late at night when everyone had already left. Another colleague claimed to hear the sound of papers moving in Gerardo's office, even when the door was locked. Small items began to disappear and reappear in incredible places, as if some invisible hand was moving them from one place to another. One night, I had to stay late to finish a spreadsheet that was left incomplete. The hallways were empty and quiet, heightening my sense of unease. It felt as if the factory was watching my every move, as if waiting for some kind of response or acknowledgement. At every distant sound, I held my breath, hoping to see something moving in the shadows. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, almost like a sigh, coming from the hallway leading to Gerardo's office. My body froze, and the feeling of an invisible presence around me became palpable, as if someone was watching me. At that moment, a bizarre idea crossed my mind. Perhaps Gerardo wasn't there just to haunt. Maybe he was trying to communicate something. There was something he needed to show or do, something unfinished. And the insurance policy, the one I was still keeping secret, might be the key to understanding what was happening. After that night, I decided to delve deeper into Gerardo's life, particularly his last days before the accident. I went to his wife, my friend, under some pretense to try to learn more about his financial situation. During our conversation, she mentioned that Gerardo had seemed worried lately, as if he were carrying an emotional burden she couldn't understand. He talked about debts and responsibilities he thought would never end, as if he were trapped in an invisible web of obligations. As our conversation progressed, I realized she didn't know anything about the insurance policy. I decided to show her the document. She was surprised, almost in disbelief at what she saw. "I never knew about this," she said, with tears in her eyes. "Gerardo never talked about this policy. Maybe he was planning something to ensure I would be okay in case something happened." That moment was a turning point. By handing the policy to his wife, I felt that I might have fulfilled part of what Gerardo expected from me. The revelation brought a sense of relief, but still, something felt unfinished. The factory still carried an air of mystery, and the supernatural events didn't cease. One night, the guard approached me. He said that after re-watching the footage from the cameras, he had seen Gerardo's figure once again. This time, it seemed like he was looking directly into the camera, as if trying to reach out from another realm. "I can't shake the feeling that he's trying to tell us something," the guard confessed. His voice trembled, but in his eyes there was determination, as if he were prepared to confront the unknown. Together, we devised a plan. We decided to hold a small ceremony to honor Gerardo's memory, to give him closure and allow his spirit to rest. We invited some colleagues, and on a chilly evening, we gathered in front of Gerardo's office. We lit candles and shared stories about him, recalling the laughter and joy he brought to our lives. As we lit the last candle, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air became lighter, as if Gerardo's spirit was acknowledging us, and we collectively felt a warm presence surround us. From that day on, the strange events in the factory began to fade. Gerardo's office remained empty, but the heaviness that had once filled it lifted. The wet footprints disappeared, and the whispers faded. It was as if the factory, once haunted by an unfinished story, had finally found peace. And in that journey, I realized that sometimes the stories that haunt us are merely the echoes of unfinished business. By acknowledging those echoes and honoring them, we create a path to healing, allowing those who have departed to finally rest. Over time, I realized that what happened that night was just the beginning of something deeper, something that started to strengthen within that house. The light and almost playful chaos of Simon, the invisible boy, began to be replaced by a dense, heavy atmosphere. As if another presence was there that did not appreciate our closeness to the spirit of the child. Some nights I would wake up feeling as though someone was watching me. More than once I opened my eyes, afraid of what I would see around me. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that feeling persisted, and it always seemed to come from my sister's room, as if something evil was lurking there. On one of those nights, while my sister slept peacefully next to me, I had convinced her to sleep with me without telling her the real reason. We heard footsteps in the hallway, dragging steps, as if someone were walking barefoot and struggling to walk. I looked at my sister, who was awake, her eyes wide with fear. Without saying a word, she grabbed my hand tightly, and we both stayed silent, trying not to breathe deeply so our breaths wouldn't be heard. The steps stopped right in front of our bedroom door. An indescribable chill enveloped us, as if the entire temperature of the house had dropped drastically in a matter of seconds. Seconds dragged on, and the sound continued. The doorknob began to tremble, slowly turning, as if someone was trying to enter. I closed my eyes, my mind racing to process what to do if that door opened. When it finally went silent, we remained in absolute stillness until the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, easing the feeling of oppression. The next morning, we tried to act as if nothing had happened, but fear was etched on our faces. We decided to put a cross on our bedroom door and another in the living room, trying to drive away that disturbing presence. Although we believed Simon was a peaceful entity, something told me that there was something else in our house, something that was challenging us and testing our endurance. From that day on, everything intensified. Whenever we were in the kitchen or living room, we felt a pressure behind us, as if a pair of eyes were watching us. Once, while I was washing the dishes, one of the knives slipped off the counter without explanation, falling just inches from my foot. It seemed that the presence was toying with our fear, daring us to confront it. To further amplify our anxiety, our cat began to act strangely. She avoided entering certain rooms, especially my sister's room. When she would pass close by, she would arch her back, her fur bristling and ears lowered, letting out a low growl. Sometimes she would stare at a point in the room, hunching her back as if she saw something hidden from us. In those moments, we would both stay silent, feeling that any wrong move could draw that thing's attention to us. Finally, we decided to seek help. We went to see an old woman known in the village for her reputation as a kind of medium and healer. She received us with a deep gaze, and without us saying a word about the strange events, she said, "You have a presence in your house, and it doesn't want to leave." Her words fell upon us like a sentence. Firmly, the old woman took a sprig of mugwort and several aromatic herbs, lit incense for peace, and instructed us to burn the leaves while praying for protection. That night, we performed the ritual exactly as the old woman had taught us. The house was infused with the strong scent of burned herbs, and for a moment, we felt the atmosphere lighten. However, while we were praying, we heard that familiar sound again. The doorknob to my sister's room began to turn. This time, we had something that gave us courage. With trembling hands, we held the cross, reciting each word of protection louder. Slowly, the sound ceased. In the end, the old woman from the village advised us to establish a clear boundary with the spirits. She said that often, souls that do not find peace become restless, manifesting in more intense forms to try to communicate their pain or anger. In the following days, we followed her advice, lighting candles and loudly declaring that this space was ours and that we sought peace. Every night, we called out to Simon, asking him not to let evil reach us. The heavy and oppressive presence that had taken over the house seemed to gradually fade. The noises diminished, and even our cat began to roam the house more peacefully. Slowly, we managed to live again without that constant fear. Yet, that experience left a deep mark on us. We learned to respect the invisible, to treat the unknown with caution and humility. And even though Simon never did anything wrong, we knew something more dangerous had passed through that place. Every time we told this story, we felt a shiver, a quiet reminder that the world we cannot see is much closer than we think. That period marked us and taught us about the power that certain places hold, about energies that linger, and about the respect we must have for them. Today, recalling sleepless nights, strange sounds, and desperate prayers, we are grateful that we emerged from that experience with the feeling that we, in some way, managed to protect our home. And in every memory of that time, we catch ourselves whispering, "Rest easy, Simon," hoping that he, wherever he is, can still hear and protect the house from any shadow that dares to approach. Not long after, my sister's friend visited us with her 2-year-old daughter. To our surprise, the little girl seemed disturbed, refusing to enter the house, especially my sister's room. She persistently asked to leave, saying she didn't like that place. When my sister tried to take her to the room to play with her stuffed animals, the little girl began to cry, terrified. In the end, they left quickly, and my sister and I exchanged worried glances. We tried to rationalize it, but soon doubt crept in. Did the little girl see something? They say children have a special sensitivity to see what we cannot, and the idea that the child sensed Simon's presence, or something else, left us unsettled. This visit from our aunts and uncles reignited what we had tried to avoid acknowledging. The red house, with its air of abandonment and high walls, held something more than mere bricks and peeling paint. It was not just an empty property, but a space where the past still tangibly resided. With every appearance of the mysterious lady, we felt a chill running down our spines, a mix of curiosity and respect, or perhaps fear, toward the inexplicable. Over time, we tried to convince ourselves that it was just a coincidence, a visual mix-up, something our aunts imagined. But somehow, each of them saw the same woman, in different situations, interacting so naturally as if she had never left. What disturbed us even more was that the lady never seemed interested in us, the living. Her routine always appeared the same, a monotonous repetition of acts from her past life. Washing clothes, walking through the yard, exchanging greetings with those who watched her, as if she were trapped in a loop of memories. Conversations with neighbors only confirmed what we feared. They all seemed to know the story of Dora Shaniti, a former resident, a woman who, even after death, seemed never to have left the house. They whispered about her, as if it would be disrespectful to mention her name out loud. Over time, our aunts and uncles' visits became less frequent. They never spoke directly about what they had seen, but they avoided the house with one excuse or another. Finally, we decided to face the situation as part of the essence of the Red House. We didn't know what brought her back, but her presence had become part of the landscape, a kind of silent coexistence. In a way, that figure in the house dress and short hair, always busy, became a symbol of something greater. She was not just a spectral presence. She was a manifestation of memories that linger, lives that for some reason do not find peace. And so, every time we passed through the yard or along the high wall, a part of us almost expected to see her there, moving silently like an echo of the past. The red house, which once frightened us, had become a living memorial, a place where time was no longer linear but a spiral in which the present and the past coexisted, silent and irreversibly intertwined.